Coming up in today's newscast, former IDF Chief Gadi Eisenkot admits to helping Syrian rebel groups. The Brussels Jewish Museum shooter refuses to testify in court, and Zaka dive teams explore the Danube River in Hungary for the remains of lost Holocaust victims. In a shocking change of policy, now former IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot revealed on Sunday to the British Sunday Times newspaper that Israel has indeed been supplying weapons and funding to Syrian rebel groups in the Golan Heights. These claims have been made many times throughout the years, but this is the first time an Israeli official has confirmed such reports, and it came on the same day that Eisenkot admitted responsibility for striking, quote, thousands of targets in Syria as well. Until now, Israel has only ever discussed humanitarian aid shipments and programs like Operation Good Neighbor. Earlier this week, Prime Minister and Defense Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also broke with Israel's tradition of ambiguity in Syria by adding to Eisenkot's comments. He confirmed not only that Israel carried out hundreds of attacks against Iranian and Hezbollah targets, but also that Israel struck Damascus International Airport last weekend. A break from policy that at the time was considered just a campaign ploy.
רק ב-36 השעות האחרונות חיל האוויר תקף מחסנים של איראן עם נשק איראני בשדה התעופה הבינלאומי בדמשק. סבב התקיפות האחרונות מוכיח שאנו נחושים יותר מתמיד לפעול נגד איראן בסוריה בדיוק כפי שהבטחנו.
In his interview with the British Sunday Times, however, Eisenkot continued that the weapons shipments to rebel groups consisted of light munitions for self-defense, while a September report by Foreign Policy magazine quoted alleged Syrian rebel leaders and soldiers as saying Israel was arming and funding at least a dozen different groups to prevent Iranian and Iranian proxy forces from advancing southward. In fact, Foreign Policy wrote that Israel transferred assault rifles, machine guns, mortar launchers, vehicles, and more. That being said, rebel groups in the region still reportedly feel abandoned by Israel, both due to the lack of Israeli intervention during Assad's recapturing of Syrian territory and due to the discontinuing of Israeli military and humanitarian aid that followed. In other news, as Operation Northern Shield nears completion with the discovery of the sixth and supposedly last Hezbollah terror tunnel into Israel, United States diplomats on Monday told Lebanese officials that the ongoing situation with Hezbollah is unacceptable. The comments came at the end of an official visit to Lebanon by United States Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs David Hale, where Hale met with Prime Minister-designate Saad Hariri and multiple other top officials. During the meetings, Hale reportedly sought answers to the United States' concerns regarding the ongoing vacuum in Lebanon's parliament. The issue threatens billions of dollars in international investments, and Hale explained that, quote, crucial economic reforms languish while obstructionism drags down the economy, endangering the country, end quote. Additionally, Hale reportedly reiterated the United States' commitment to both Israel and Lebanon's security, while also conveying the United States' worries regarding Iran's, quote, dangerous activities in the region, which includes the funding and arming of proxy armies. Therefore, despite having widespread political presence in Lebanon, Hezbollah is out in the eyes of the White House.
And we are proceeding with our efforts to counter Iran's dangerous activities around the region, including the financing and activities of proxy terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah. And while Lebanon has the right to defend itself, that is a right of the Lebanese state alone. It is unacceptable to have a militia outside the control of the state and unanswerable to all the people of Lebanon, digging attack tunnels across the Blue Line into Israel or assembling an arsenal of over 100,000 missiles with which to threaten regional stability.
Meanwhile, as Hezbollah attempts infiltrations into Israel, Lebanese media reports indicate that a man wearing military-style clothing has allegedly crossed into Lebanon from Israel. The IDF has confirmed damage to the fence along the northern border and tracks that seem to confirm the reports, and an investigation into the incident has now been launched. Additionally, multiple Lebanese news outlets have also corroborated that a matching suspect has been spotted in Lebanese border communities, though details in the reports do differ. United States Deputy Secretary of Energy Dan Brouillette met with Israeli officials today, where he continued to draw attention to the United States' growing fears of foreign interference in Israel through economic means. In particular, he discussed the growing Chinese influence on the Israeli market and the Chinese investment in the naval port of Haifa. Well, joining me now to further discuss the White House's vetting concerns is Dan Katarivas, the Director General for Foreign Trade and International Relations with the Manufacturers Association of Israel. Dan, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, Brouillette said that he would like the United States to work with Israel in creating a vetting program. How do you think that?
I mean, look, it's not the first time. And we had Bolton that came here just 2 weeks ago, a week ago, and also mentioned the preoccupation of the US on Israel-China relation. I think that definitely, seeing what's happening between China and US, okay, and the trade war, which is only one expression of a growing tension between China and the US. So obviously Israel is in a very peculiar situation because we are a very small country. We are depending on foreign trade. We cannot ignore the fact that China is a rising power. We cannot ignore the fact that US is our major ally and our major strategic ally. So the question is how to position ourselves on one way, keeping good relation with the US, not wanting to hurt our relation with the US. On the other hand, not ignoring the fact that China is becoming a major player economically. So that's how to find the right balance is a challenge. Now, the problem is that in the US today and the White House, presumably, you've got people that look at China relation with the US as a zero-sum game, i.e. anything that is good for China is bad for the US and vice versa, okay? I don't think that the private sector in the US has the same position, okay? They are engaged with China. There is a lot of interdependence. I think that rightly so, the Americans are pointing out to the Israelis that they should actually maybe look a bit more deep into to what area do they let the Chinese cooperate with Israel.
So that's actually a point I wanted to get to. Nadav Argaman, head of the Shin Bet, he recently, as you just mentioned, mentioned that Israel needs to look way more closely at some of the foreign investments, specifically from China. And again, he made reference to the port. Not only from China, of course. But therein lies the question: at what point is a foreign investment crossing the line?
Well,
and how many?
It's a challenging issue. What is a strategic investment? Okay, when the Chinese bought Tnuva, which is a major dairy, the major dairy or milk production in Israel, is that a strategic investment? Are they going to take the cows?
It's a food manufacturing.
Okay, so no, the question of food security definitely is a question, but it's more a problem with food security in China. Probably the acquisition of Tnuva had a reason not for Israel, but for China. China wanted to guarantee some access to technology in milk or in dairy product, okay? Is that a major problem? I'm not sure. I mean, so the question is, what is a strategic investment and what is not a strategic investment? I think that in the world today, where everything is a bit mixed, it's very difficult to really identify, okay? What today looks at the non-strategic might tomorrow be strategic and vice versa, okay? So I think that we have in Israel and I think that's not a bad idea, that the Israeli government will set up a system of screening and analyzing foreign investment, not only Chinese one, but we have other countries that are investing in Israel, and we have.
And you don't see anything wrong with that, with maybe a foreign government like even the United States?
There is a major difference, which we definitely. I'm not naive, okay? I think that behind almost any Chinese investment, there is the Chinese government or the Chinese Communist Party, okay, which is something totally different than, let's say, an American investment.
And has stated quite publicly that they're intent on
but this is a different system, okay? But
Sure.
again, so I'm saying we should be careful. We should take the necessary measure. I think that if our American friends want to advise us what is the best way to identify or to check what is the strategy or what is the intention of the foreign investors, in particular the Chinese, we should take that advice. And don't forget, we shouldn't forget that our major ally is the US. It's not China.
All right. Well, I agree that you can always take advice from any foreign power, especially the United States being our ally.
Especially
from the United States. Dan, thank you so much for coming in today.
Welcome.
Palestinian terror group Hamas has finally released a group of 3 Italian civilians who were held for over 24 hours after entering the Gaza Strip on Monday. The group of Italians had entered the Strip as part of a diplomatic mission to confirm security preparedness ahead of a visit to Gaza by the Italian ambassador to Israel, but Hamas reportedly suspected that they were secretly Israeli agents using Italian papers. According to reports, Hamas chased the Italians in their armored vehicle with diplomatic plates after it crossed into Gaza. And Hamas even reportedly fired upon the car before the diplomatic team arrived at an UNRWA facility where they sought refuge. Hamas, however, rejects these accounts, saying the Italians' vehicle was not involved in any shooting incident. After they arrived at the UNRWA office, though, UNRWA officials apparently then confirmed the identity and citizenship of the Italians, but to no use. Hamas military forces surrounded the UNRWA building and held everyone inside for over a day. It wasn't until after the Italian ambassador to Israel spoke with Hamas head Ismail Haniyeh that they were checked again and released. Now, while the case seems to have resolved, the incident does bring attention to Hamas's state of mind with respect to Israeli incursion. The Gaza terror organization has long accused many of cooperating with or spying for the enemy, even dolphins. But since the November IDF raid that ended in the death of an Israeli officer and sparked massive rounds of Gaza rocket fire, Hamas has seemingly been especially on edge.
The trial of 33-year-old French national Mehdi Namosh is now underway, and Namosh stands accused of shooting dead an Israeli couple and 2 museum workers in the Jewish Museum of Brussels on May 24, 2014. But reports on Tuesday show that Namosh, who is pleading not guilty, is also now refusing to testify. The Brussels attack 4 years ago marked the first time that a supposed Islamic extremist had returned to Europe from the Middle East to carry out an attack, and he and another suspect now face up to life in prison if convicted. But Namosh denies taking part in the shooting, claiming that he only participated in the transfer of the guns supposedly used in the attack. Further, he also previously stated that he believes Israeli operatives of the Mossad or another such agency is actually responsible and is framing him for the attack. That's not why he's refusing to testify, though. Namosh is reportedly refusing to talk now due to the court's apparent rejection of all of his witnesses that could have supported his testimony.
Il a expliqué que ces 130 témoins ont été refusés. Je peux comprendre M. Namosh lorsqu'il n'a pas envie que seule la voix de l'accusation soit portée contre lui et que sur aucun élément il puisse dire mais non, tel expert, vous savez, il dit n'importe quoi ou ça ne tient pas et je vais vous le prouver avec mon contre-expert à moi. C'est refusé.
Other allegations of improper procedure have also been brought to the court's attention recently, including the fact that no DNA or prints at the scene have been linked to Namosh, and that paperwork for the case was not handed to the defense in a timely manner. Prosecutors, however, did find the murder weapons in Namosh's possession upon his arrest, and they did have his DNA and prints on them. Additionally, gunpowder residue was found on the blue jacket that greatly resembles the one the museum shooter was seen wearing. And finally, in response to the argument that this is all an alleged Israeli plot, attorneys for the Jewish Museum said that it does not hold water. And the head of the Belgian Federation of Jewish Organizations, Johan Ben-Ziri, was also quoted telling the AFP that the defense will of course try to twist the story, but that Namosh is not to become a star, he is a terrorist. It's been a few days now since violent demonstrations broke out in front of the Haifa Museum of Art over the display of a controversial sculpture depicting a crucified Ronald McDonald. But despite calls to remove the piece over accusations of religious insensitivity, Deputy Attorney General Dina Zilber has just informed Culture Minister Miri Regev that there's nothing they can do, regardless of the state funding the museum receives.
The piece is part of the Sacred Goods exhibition and was created as part of a larger series by Finnish artist Jani Linonen. But no matter what message the piece is supposed to convey, hundreds of Christians descended upon the museum last weekend to demand that it be removed. The demonstrations turned to riots, however, when firebombs and stones were thrown and protesters clashed with police. Still, in response to demonstrators, Culture Minister Regev demanded the piece be removed as well. But after examining the case at the behest of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, the Attorney General's office responded that no action could legally be taken. Deputy AG Zilber explained that freedom of expression is central in culture, and that culture of all kinds is based on freedom of artistic expression. Further, quote, the Supreme Court determined that it is at the heart of freedom of speech and needs to be protected, end quote. Additionally, with respect to pulling funding from the museum under the authority of the controversial Cultural Loyalty Bill, Zilber went on to deny that possibility for a few reasons. First, because hosting events or content which disrespects religious values isn't enough of a viable cause. And second, is because any good reasons to reduce state funding to the art museum would fall under the responsibilities of Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon anyway.
In the wake of continued allegations of anti-Semitism, it seems that the appearance of Women's March organizers Bob Bland and Tamika Mallory on The View on Monday failed to reverse or even slow the growing trend of groups distancing themselves from the movement. And now, both the Democratic National Convention and the Jewish Democratic Council of America have also ended their affiliations with the National Women's March organization. They're not alone either. Dozens of activists, celebrities, community leaders, and politicians of all faiths have dropped their support for the march, including Political Action Committee Emily's List, the National Council of Jewish Women, the Jewish Women's Federation of New York, the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue of New York, and even the Southern Poverty Law Center. In fact, according to JTA, only 11 state-run women's march organizations still affiliate themselves with the larger movement, while 22 state groups have pulled away, largely citing issues with anti-Semitism as the cause. The remaining state-run branches are unknown one way or the other. Now, the accusations of anti-Semitism began when a post by Tamika Mallory from 2017 referred to known anti-Semite and homophobe Louis Farrakhan as the greatest of all time. Mallory claims that this was in relation to his activism in the black community, though, but she has never refuted or condemned his more disgusting comments, including comparing Jews to termites. Mallory and her fellow co-president Carmen Perez were also then embroiled in controversy when they allegedly made anti-Semitic statements at a planning committee. And Linda Sarsour, another prominent leader in the march, has long been an outspoken critic of Israel and Zionists. Only Bob Bland has been crystal clear with her condemnation of hateful rhetoric. In response, then, 3 Jewish women have been tapped to join the march's new 32-member steering committee: transgender rights activist and former ultra-Orthodox Jew Abby Stein, April Baskin, who is a staffer for the Union for Reform Judaism, and Jewish diversity activist Yavila McCoy. But without a more formal apology from the leadership, most critics still look at these appointments as much too little, too late. The governor of Florida is now calling for massive sanctions against Airbnb unless the online lodging website reverses its decision to bar listings in Jewish settlements in the West Bank. And Governor Ron DeSantis consistently shared his support for Israel while campaigning last year. So for many, it comes as no surprise that he's taking a stand against Airbnb's latest policies.
In November, the lodging marketplace announced that it would delist at least 200 properties in Israeli settlements, claiming that the communities are at the core of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Governor DeSantis claims Airbnb is unfairly targeting Jewish people, however, which is why he's announcing 2 possible actions against Airbnb. He claims his state will either suspend the use of Airbnb for state-paid travel or bar the state's pension fund from investing in Airbnb. That being said, Airbnb isn't currently publicly traded, but this is a threat nonetheless if the company does decide to go public. Airbnb has responded to the announcement, saying that Airbnb, quote, remains deeply committed to our more than 20,000 hosts in Israel, and the company's spokesman, Ben Brait, added that the company does not support a boycott against the Jewish country. They have remained firm, though, in their barring of Israeli West Bank listings. Governor DeSantis is planning to visit Israel for his first international trip this coming May, and he's pledging at least $2 million in state money to Jewish schools for security enhancements.
Despite major international attention and criticisms, Malaysian Foreign Minister Saifuddin Abdullah reiterated Wednesday that the Malay government will not change its mind regarding the refusal to grant visas to Israeli swimmers. Israel has been attempting for a while now to broker an agreement granting Israeli athletes permission to compete in the Paralympics qualifying event in July. The event will host around 70 countries and act as a qualifier round for the 2020 Tokyo Paralympics. But due to the complete lack of diplomatic ties between the 2 countries of Israel and Malaysia, directors of the Israel Paralympics Committee have had no luck in securing visas. And this new statement from Abdullah only serves to lower the hopes for the Israeli athletes. Malaysia, being a predominantly Muslim country, publicly supports the Palestinian people and has had a long history of issues with Israel. Most recently, Malay officials have been condemning the United States and Australia's acceptance of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, but these latest comments by Foreign Minister Abdullah are especially discouraging, as the Malaysian cabinet has now also decided that Israelis will not be allowed to enter the country for any currently scheduled events, and neither will they host any event in the future that has any ties to the Jewish state. This to, quote, reflect the government's firm stance over the Israeli issue, end quote. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has just met with the Japanese Minister of Economy and Trade, Hiroshige Seko, and Minister Seko is in Israel now, marking his 3rd visit in the past 4 years. Additionally, he is, of course, accompanied by a massive delegation, including around 150 senior Japanese business people and around 90 representatives of major Japanese companies.
There's been a tremendous increase in Japanese investments in Israel. Minister Seko just informed me that in the last few years, the growth of Japanese investments in Israel has been 120 times. Last time I spoke, it was 44 times. So growth at an astronomical rate. Actually, $5 billion to date, but growing very rapidly.
Further, a free trade agreement between the 2 countries is now being reviewed by both sides as well, which could have a major impact on future economic ties. Around 70% of Israel's exports are shipped to countries that have signed free trade deals with the country. And already, without such a deal in place, trade between Japan and Israel amounted to around $3.5 billion in 2018, an increase of around 20% from 2017. In fact, today, Japan is the 11th largest importer of Israeli goods in annual turnover. So given that economic ties between the 2 countries are flourishing, it's also then no surprise that there's even discussion to establish direct flight routes between Japan and Israel soon. I, for one, cannot wait.
Every day brings us a little bit closer to Eurovision 2019, and we're all very excited about it. But now we may actually have one more reason to look forward to this international event, because according to new reports, it looks like the Queen of Pop, Madonna, may now be performing for the closing ceremony here in Tel Aviv. TV's Joy Gavijon is here with more. Now, Joy, just yesterday we were reporting that Omer Adam declined the invitation for the same gig. So it didn't take them too long to go for another name, huh?
And what a name, huh?
Absolutely. Okay, but how real is this?
Well, look, all we know right now is that according to Ynet, Madonna is reportedly negotiating with the organizers of Eurovision 2019 in order to perform. And apparently, the economic arrangement would be the only thing that is left to finish, because it looks like Madonna herself has already expressed her intention to perform, which is very exciting.
Yeah, all right, so, okay, this is still definitely surprising, too, despite the fact that we know that Madonna has come to Israel in the past and has a special connection with the country and the people here.
Yeah, you're right. The Queen of Pop came to Israel several times. The first time was back in 1993 when she performed in Tel Aviv in front of a crowd of around 80,000 people. Then unfortunately, in 2004, Madonna had to cancel 3 shows that were set to take place in September that year. That was because, according to some reports, she was receiving death threats from Palestinian activists, which even involved her kids.
Okay, so that's understandable why she might cancel those events. But she had a great comeback from that, yeah?
Yes, exactly. I can sense a Madonna fan talking right here. But yes, in 2009, she came back to Israel to close her world tour, and during that show she showed her love for Israel by ending the performance wrapped up in an Israeli flag and inviting her daughter Lourdes to the stage. So it was a big deal.
Yes, okay, was that the last time that she came to perform though?
No, that wasn't the last time. Her last show here in Israel was 2012, and that time she came here to open the MDNA tour. But now, if she and the organizers of Eurovision can close an agreement, she would be coming home again to Israel, more precisely to perform at the closing gala of Eurovision 2019 on May 18th. And when I say home for us, not for her.
Of course. Okay, so as we covered before, for this event, Tel Aviv is expecting around 20,000 foreigners as well, yeah?
Yes, that's right, and maybe more. I mean, if Madonna's performance is confirmed, I'm sure that we'll have more people in the city. I mean, at least for that night. But for now, this is all we know, and there's nothing officially confirmed yet. So we're just gonna have to be patient and wait.
All right, well, patience is always the hardest thing for me when it comes to waiting for confirmation like this.
You're not alone.
Yeah, I imagine that, but it is what it is, I guess. Until then, thanks for your report, Joy.
Thank you, Aaron.
According to a statement by Israeli Interior Minister Aryeh Deri on Monday, a group of Israeli divers and victim identification experts from emergency response group Zaka has now set off for Hungary in order to assist in the recovery of the remains of Hungarian Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust and tossed into the Danube River.
The search efforts are scheduled to commence later this week, and Zaka organizers explained that they'll use sonar and scanning technology in order to uncover the remains of several thousand Hungarian Jews who were killed and left to rot at the bottom of the river's bank. Additionally, Minister Deri, who discussed the plan with his Hungarian counterpart Sandor Pinter, said that any remains found in the search will be moved to Israel for Jewish burial. Zaka chairman Yehuda Meshi Zahav explained that, quote, "This is the final act of grace that we can do for these holy victims who were killed in sanctification of the Lord's name," end quote. And indeed, Israel and Israeli organizations aren't the only ones who feel this way. Nearly 600,000 Hungarian Jews were murdered during the Holocaust, a few thousand of which were shot and tossed into the Danube River between 1944 and 45. And then in 2005, Shoes on the Danube, a monument in these victims' honor, was erected along the river's shore. It consists of 60 pairs of cast iron shoes along the promenade, shaped in old-fashioned styles, and it represents how the victims were reportedly told to line up along the river and remove their shoes before being shot dead and falling in the water.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day. Most of the clearest windows into the past come in the form of some sort of remains. So today's word is sridim, meaning remains or ruins. In Hungary, Zaka divers are currently searching the Danube rivers for sridei Adam, or human remains, belonging to the victims of the Holocaust. And in Israel, sridim, or ruins of ancient civilization, can be found underneath practically every stone that you overturn. And finally, remember that a sarid, or remainder of something, doesn't always have to be dug up. For example, it could just be the last remaining bite or sarid of dessert. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. After a long and stormy day, tonight should be cloudy and rainy with a low of around 51 or 11 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect mostly cloudy skies with a high of about 61 or 16 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.68 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.